So last video we focused a lot on different legs of the Fibonacci sequence. Your A to B leg, B to C leg, C to D leg, and that all manifests differently on the extension sequence runs comparatively against what I'm about to show you, which is another manifestation of that in the form of an ABCD leg. Now, ABCD typically formulates on higher time frames. You'll see them most often on 4 hour daily, weekly, and up. At least that's when I put the most emphasis on them, and that's because they're not in sequence. So they happen when there's a not necessarily a broken sequence, but a broken fib in the opposite direction. And you'll see what I mean in a second. But what they're really helpful in doing is identifying where if one portion of the sequence happened and some of the money, some of the transactions nestled itself into that retracement period, and then it aggressively moved beyond the take profit, and there's no extension sequence that forms. This ABCD pattern typically helps to identify some larger scale zones where that take profit may happen. So if you lucked out and you're holding a runner that is pushing towards those profit targets, then it might give you a little bit more information around where you might want to consider exiting. Now, to get into it, first and foremost, you're going to want one additional piece of information on your fibs. And you see that I have on my fibs the 50, 61.8, negative 23.6, which is my typical profit target, and then the 161.8. The 161.8 is important. That is what identifies your ABCD pattern. So this is what it looks like. Okay? In my fib settings, and what at least including the 1.618 should look like. Now, to go beyond just getting it on your chart, well, what does it mean? So if you think about where we were last time with the Fibonacci sequence, we've done fib validation, we've done extension sequencing, where if from here we push past and we're looking for high to high. Well, ABCD is a pattern-driven methodology off of something similar. If you get your A to B leg and then your B to C leg sits somewhere in the 50 to 61.8 zone, you can fib this. And instead of looking for the retracement to do this, you really save this. You save the ABCD pattern for if this happens rather than a retracement and then falling back down. And you might be thinking, well, we've already got something in place to identify this. Yes, 100% we do. We've already got the extension sequencing if we get the clean 50. Or somewhere in the sequence we have a clean 50. ABCD can be used in parallel with extension sequencing, or in conjunction with, can be used separate of, or if it's on a higher time frame and you're really looking for long-term movement and exacerbated movement, it can be its own thing to help identify zones of interest for price to kind of halt. So what happens in this case? Well, let's start to build out a plan using just this information, right? Price is here. Let's start to build out a plan using just this information. So we get our retracement and we get long. We plot out our negative 23.6 so that if ever we remove this, since we're already in there, we don't have to worry about this, right? So we've entered our position. We don't want anything crowding our chart, so sometimes I will just plot out the negative 23.6 and identify it and remove the rest of these lines. So let's remove. We'll plot out, and we've got our negative 23.6. We'll show that on the right, and let's just mark that off as such. So this is our original profit target. Price starts pretty aggressively moving, and we're in decent profit. Starting to consider where should we target, where should things come off? Well, now we've got our A to B leg already established. We've got A. We've got B. What side? One on the right. We've got our C leg, or a C point, which is where we entered. And now, where's our D location? D is going to be wherever this leg completes. So when we have A, B, and C, we can start thinking about where D is going to take place. So to do that, you have A to B, which was fibbed and gave us an entry. Now if we take B to C and we plot that out, we start looking at negative 161.8 being somewhere around our D leg. So what we can do is we can then plot this negative 161.8 out. And this is our D leg, or D point, I guess, because it's the leg is the C to D. Now we can take this off. So what does this now indicate? Well, this gives us, especially since these are relatively close together, a really tight zone to start looking at for our profits to come off. And all that means is, especially, and this is where it becomes more useful in position trading long term, where if you're doing something like options or spot forex, you can start to visualize and identify larger areas and larger zones if you just want to simplify your trading and do zone to zone trading. So this is all well and good. Let's put this into practice. So let's look through what's happened in this rough area, right? Let's see if we can't find a few instances of ABCD manifesting. So let's just do some basic markup. And see if there's any way that ABCD or fibs in general may help with identifying points of resistance. That didn't touch. We get nice clear tests right here of this price level. We fall out of that and retrace. That looks pretty good to me. We get the 61.8 holds for all intents and purposes. It's not the cleanest, but we've then got a nice zone down here, or a nice profit target. So we've got our entries. we've got our profit target. So let's plot out our profit target. Let's get rid of that fib so that we're not clouding our chart. And then let's map out our B to C leg. And see if that doesn't give us any more information. Okay, so we've got our area of interest down below. So this is our ABCD completion. To the right. And we'll plot that out. So now what this gives us looking through is that this zone, it's not a change control zone. It's not a supplier demand zone. It's a zone built out by identifying ABCD and fib completions. So what do you do with that? Well, if you take these out and you just kind of really make this sit very closely to the color of your chart, you can really just look at this as a potential reversal zone. Knowing that as price comes down around here, right, we haven't filled yet here. Let's say that this retraced a little bit higher. Give yourself a little more confidence that entering short on any sort of retracement here before we got the sell-off would be, of greater likelihood to fall more towards that reversal zone. Let's say we plot out our price level here. This, I wouldn't take it based on exclusively this, but gives you a little bit more confidence if there were more to align here, knowing that we haven't completed down here and it's not a huge zone. What else does it mean? Well, it means that as we're approaching the bottom of this zone and we're starting to look at, all right, well, we went down towards it. We started to push towards that zone. We completed in that zone and we hit the ABCD pattern and now we're coming out of it. Well, now that gives us an indicator that, you see, we had a retracement towards towards this price level. And had we fibbed this last leg, I'm sure that this would have been a really solid entry and given some pretty great confidence that we could enter there. See, it's a nice clean 61.8. But knowing that we've already completed this ABCD zone on a larger scale, Fibonacci sequence, I might not be too interested in taking the short. And if I do, by no means am I willing to take it down beyond even the top of this zone, because I know that price has kind of turned around. Price has really found a bottom and started to identify a reversal point. Now, let's look at and see if we can't find anything that identifies more zone to zone trading. All right, so let's keep that and we'll move that, leave that. So let's say that coming out of this, instead, what I looked to do was we found our bottom. I got long right here. So I'm long here. Where do I take it? Where could this possibly run? So we get our retracement again back towards the 50. And actually, we'll look a little bit higher just because we did hit a little higher before we came down. So to identify some zone-to-zone trading, before we really made our retracement, this is kind of where we topped out. We got our take profit level. If we clear this off and then we fib down towards here, we give ourselves our negative 161 or our 161 up top. And now if we look at this and we remove everything else from the chart, we've got a perfect example of zone-to-zone trading. So we came down, found our bottom, found an entry as we were retesting our reversal zone, had another crack at it if we wanted, and identified a spot where price was going to start turning around. So as we come back towards it, I don't have any real interest in going long into this zone after testing it, so we fib out of it. And now you see we test this negative 23.6, build out a reversal zone, but test that negative 23.6 cleanly, and we start to sequence into this run down. So there's a lot you can do with this. There's a lot that you can play with and a lot that you can help to identify reversal zones. It's just a matter of what sits well with you. And again, this was found on the hourly. I don't typically look for ABCD patterns on the hourly. I typically look for them on 4-hour, daily, weekly, monthly for long-term positions. But I would say anything hourly up, you can find some positions and you can find some points on the chart that identify reversal zones, be it intraday, be it on a weekly basis, and kind of identify overall weekly sentiment, which is great if you're trading Nadex and you just have to get hands off and take a weekly chart or a weekly trade, a weekly 50-50 binary and just let it ride. So this kind of lends itself more towards hands-off trading where you don't have to worry about the margin, where you don't have to worry about the maintenance margin and the carryover price, and instead you can more focus on just zone-to-zone trading and kind of give yourself proper areas to target and proper areas to kind of avoid, if you will. So practice with this. It will take some practice. It will take some time in looking at the charts to identify, but that's the core behind ABCD patterns.